Thanks very much, Kamala. I really want to thank you for this opportunity, and I appreciate being able to be among people of this caliber and to be sitting and sharing with you all. I really want to welcome the three panelists, and I will start by introducing Kenny Attai. He is now retired, 46-year career spanning from telecommunications, aviation, corporate communications, corporate account management, project management and consultancy. He has been on many boards and NGOs, family-run businesses. He has been on BWIA, which is now called CAL, and he's also has been on the Massy Group board. He has traveled extensively throughout his career, and he is the holder of an MBA and a diploma in project management. Kenny Attai, welcome. Our next panelist is Aleema Mohammed. Aleema Mohammed is the Corporate Secretary of Bourse Securities Limited. She's also the president of the Mutual Fund Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And she's a member of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and also a member of the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists. Aleema Mohammed, welcome. And our third panelist is an attorney at law. She is Frances Bain-Cumberbatch. Frances is the Chief Legal and External Affairs Officer of the Ansa McAL Group. During her career, she has gained invaluable practical knowledge and experience in law in areas such as intellectual property, commercial and corporate and industrial relations. In addition to her qualifications in law, she also holds a double degree in French and Spanish. Frances Cumberbatch, bienvenida. I will start by welcoming Kenny Attai to give his discourse on the topic that Kamala already told us about, which is the role of the corporate secretaries in family-owned or family-run businesses.
Thank you, Margaret. You hear me now? No? Yes. Okay. I always came across your name before while in industry, and I never saw the face, so I'm quite happy to see the face this morning, today. So I now know who is this Margaret De Peza. Yeah.
I too am retired.
Yes. And good evening and welcome, everybody. Kamala, I was just taking a look at all the speakers on today's recorded for today, and I realized that there's 17 of us, and only Nigel, Chairman Romano, and myself are male. Everybody else, so I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with coming up against so many females.
Kenny, I hunted actively for males, but we are not finding too many of them. On the role of corporate secretary.
So I need to be on my P's and Q's here. Okay, well, first of all, thanks very much for CCGI. I think this is a very important activity in the industry, and very, very happy to be part of it. Yeah. I just wanted to start and to say that we are talking about family-run businesses, but I just want to make clarification that there's family business and business family. What I'm going to speak about is family business, though, and more so the smaller family businesses that single business type, or probably two businesses being run by a family, as opposed to business families who are more involved in a wider enterprise, yeah, and a little more complex. But I'm not a corporate secretary or an attorney, but I'm an executive business consultant. But I have a deep passion for corporate governance, and in my role, whenever I'm called to to family-owned companies, most of the time, it is to help with strategy. And if they're in a spot of trouble in terms of how to maneuver getting out of that. And what I have found is that while they may be looking at the possibility of growing the organization as the business grows, they are not familiar with some of the formalities that the business requires, so as to be able to put it in good stead. So one of the first things that really we had to do is to identify the three components of a family-owned business. One is, of course, the family. Two, who are the owners of the business, and three, the business itself. So most of the time you find is that these three components are all mixed up together. So when the business started in its early stages, there wasn't any problem. But as the business grows, then you find that things started to become a little more complex and needed some sort of guidance. So if we look at the role, the primary role of corporate secretary, which is to provide guidance on the legal framework in the small family-owned businesses, once that is taken care of, and I work a lot with attorneys to provide me with that backup for the corporate secretary type activity. Then the focus really shifts on how do you try to start getting the owners of the company to start looking at governance, good governance in running the business, and why it is you need good governance. How will the company benefit from it? A lot of the time, the smaller companies, of course, from the time they hear corporate secretary, no, we're too small for that. We don't need that. We small enough to operate without a corporate secretary. However, when the company may see opportunities outside there to go after, say, for example, a tender, and certain requirements are needed for the tender, then now they will see that they're asking to supply certain things as part of the requisite for the tender, only to find out, well, some of those things that we never thought of, or we need to find help to put it in place. So most of the time when I get engaged with one of these family-owned companies to help with strategy and help to grow the business, I try to see how I could use that opportunity to, first of all, influence the formalization of a structure that will provide good governance practices. For them, some of them may be familiar with some of the things, some of them may not, because most of these companies, when they start, is either one member of the family, whether it's the father or the mother or one of the children, that has a particular skill or specialization, and they have the funds to throw behind it, and they start a company, incorporate a company, and start up the business, and very involved in the day-to-day business. But as the business grows, the structures are not in place, so decision making becomes very problematic. So what I try to do is to look and see how we could put some checks and balances in place, start with establishing a board and putting a structure in place where the decision making is not held by one person, and use the board to help discuss that issue and get the involvement of the family to be able to be part of that decision. But the challenges in that really is how to separate the family from the business per se. Some members take title, but don't understand what the title, the responsibilities of that title. So say, for example, the owner or the father or the mother, whoever started off the business, may take the role of the managing director or the chairperson. But coming out of that, every other member of the family may take a executive title, but not really knowing what it is, because some of them are not trained. So therein lies the opportunity to help provide that sort of guidance in implementing the kind of structure and create the practices of good corporate governance. So some of the challenges really that we face is making sure that the family understands the issues versus the business, and not bringing family issues into once we establish the boardroom or the board, bringing those family issues inside the board. Because when decision time comes, you find that the husband may not want the wife to make a decision because of that husband and wife relationship, not understanding that that has nothing to do with the business per se. We are here to discuss the issues and let us stick with the issues. So one of the ways that I've been able to get over that is to address the individual family members rather than husband, wife, son, daughter, or whatever, by the titles. So if there's a discussion going on, we ask, okay, so the director responsible for HR, what is your take on that? The director responsible for operations, what is your take on that? And try and gradually get them away from that family relationship, as opposed to treating with the issues from a broader perspective of the business. One of the other major challenges that you face and to overcome is how do they share information at the board level once the board is established. And this has been a lot of them have been very reluctant, especially the owner of the business, to be able to share some of this information in the meeting. So I try to make sure that we bring the right amount of business, right amount of information to the room, so that it can be discussed and the decision made on that. I know I only have 10 minutes, but I would hold it there. My alarm just went off, so I'd hold it there, and then I'll take it up after if there are any questions as we go along. So over to you, Margaret.
Thanks very much, Kenny. I mean, that was very insightful. And when you were going through it, I started to think, about how things happen in the family versus a state enterprise versus a private company or public sector. So I will ask Francis and Aleema to make their comments, starting with Francis first, and what Kenny just said.
Thank you, Margaret. Kenny, you all are hearing me, right? Yes, okay. Kenny, thank you for that that presentation. It's interesting because it's coming from a totally different angle that I'm accustomed to, even though and you made that distinction at the start of your presentation. It is when you have a family involved in a business and you're starting from scratch, ground up, it is very difficult, I can well imagine, to have them separate the family discussions from the business discussions all the time at that very early stage. And I would imagine that a corporate secretary in that environment, once, of course, they have accepted that the corporate secretary's role is not just to take minutes and give them the legal framework, but it would be very important, I would think, for a corporate secretary in that situation to sort of drive the culture, which you've explained that you've done in very key ways, like addressing subtle but important ways, like making sure they address, or you address them in accordance with their title, whatever title they hold in the business. So you start inculcating that business-like culture within that boardroom, separate and apart from the family issues. So I thought that was insightful for me, because it's a different level of maturity in terms of business, family business that I'm accustomed dealing with. So I thought that was insightful. The little things that you could do as a corporate secretary to ensure that you start at the initial stages to build that culture of business and formality around the way things are conducted in the boardroom.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, Aleema, thanks.
Okay, so I guess I am somewhere in the middle between Francis and Kenny, where yes, I fully endorse the points that Kenny has made in terms of when a family business is now starting out, and there is that mixture of the family structure into the business structure. And as he rightfully said, when the business starts to grow, you start seeing some of the challenges that can evolve, perhaps as even if you have generational changes in terms of second generation and so on, there tends to be that that challenge of separating the family from the business, the very fabric of the business itself. And I think for me, it might actually be quite relevant for me in my role as corporate secretary. I am part of the family that has the majority shareholding of the company that I am a part of. Although I have an in-law role, which Annette, when she speaks on Thursday, will talk about some of the issues with that in itself. But exactly as Francis has said, the critical role of the corporate secretary, I think, is so much more important in that setting, because you want to make sure that the building of the governance blocks, and all of the characteristics that we spoke about this morning in terms of relationship building and so on, it tends to be even more so critical, because now you're managing so much more personal relationships in addition to the business hats that persons are wearing. So I think certainly excellent points in terms of when you're starting a business, what are the issues and challenges that one faces? And as a corporate secretary, what are the challenges that you have to overcome to try to get through to your board members, the person sitting around the table? And in my presentation, I will say a bit more, but it helps when you have non-family members that form part of that setting.
Well, thank you very much, Aleema and Francis, for your contributions. And I will now turn to Francis to give your presentation.
Thank you very much, Margaret Ann. I appreciate it. So yes, I am the Chief Legal and External Affairs Officer of the Ansa McAL Group, but I'm also the Corporate Secretary to the parent board of the Ansa McAL Group. Ansa McAL is 140 years old this year. So it's a long-standing institution. It's publicly listed. There are two publicly listed companies also within the group, one of which is a financial services group, the Ansa Merchant Bank Group, we would call it now. We've just acquired a commercial bank. We have 40 operating companies within 9 sectors. We have formal external auditors from the Big Four firm, one of the Big Four firms. We have an internal audit structure. We have a parent board. We have subsidiary boards. We have 3,000 shareholders, and of course, of which is the major shareholder, which is a family. So different from Kenny's example, the governance structure and framework is far more advanced than a company that is just starting out as a family business. So it's a lot different. These things are already there, they're established, but you as the corporate secretary, you still have to build on that. And within the family context, there are things that you have to pay attention to that are not the same in other organizations, because family values are prevalent and prominent throughout the organization, and the choice of the governance structure and how you build on what is required by law and all of those things. So one of the things that you have to do as a corporate secretary is to be a very good influencer, because you are key to supporting the sustainability and longevity of the entity. The family relies on you to ensure that you keep up to date on trends in governance, that you can advise, and that you will be persistent if necessary in terms of bringing those to the forefront and how they can be implemented within the existing framework. Now, one of the things I would want to highlight in a family owned or controlled organization is, how does the corporate secretary play a role in infusing or ensuring that there is a strong culture of independence balanced with the family input? Most families now are very concerned about corporate governance and having external and independent input into the discussions that they're having at board level. And you know, the benefit of this is obvious, because it gives a different perspective to things. The way the family or the way the management would view things would be different from independent people who have the relevant experience, knowledge, to give a certain an added value to the strategy that is being formulated by the board. So the corporate secretary, from the way I see it, and in my own experience, dealing with the independent directors, because, you know, you could say, you know, the directors join, you could say that there is, you know, you welcome independent input. Of course, the chairman in his first conversation, if someone is coming onto the board, would say, you know, we are a family, this is, you know, controlled, the group is controlled by the family or owned by the family, but we want independent input and so on. But consistently reinforcing that, I think, is an important aspect of the corporate secretary in that type of environment, because you want to encourage independent directors to allow them to feel free to express their views at any given point in time without hesitation. So I know, and I know the value of independent input. So I'll give you examples of when, you know, management, we would have baked something, you know, you prepared, you worked very hard at it, you put together a paper and you think this is the best thing since sliced bread, right? I mean, you're coming to present it to the board or the board committee and you're saying, right, this is going to be 5 minutes, right? You know, and you plan the agenda to suit and all of that. And then you get into the room and what seems like a totally different perspective and a complete curveball, and something that you may have planned to be 5-10 minutes then turns out to be an hour and a half, because one independent director may have had a very strong opinion and a perspective that was completely different from what you were coming with. And I have seen firsthand, I mean, just recently, with something that we had prepared for governance committee. And the director, I mean, he put the whole thing in a tailspin. And while the basic structure that we were recommending and so on was accepted, there were key points which, after that meeting, again, as the corporate secretary, as the translator, would have summarized what that independent director said, which was agreed by the rest of the committee, who are also independent directors. Summarized that and gave it to the CEO, who then pondered it and said, you know, this is actually very interesting. Okay, so we need to consider X, Y, and Z. then, I mean, I can cite another incident recently that happened as well. I mean, we were gung-ho about something. When I say we, management now, I wasn't involved in this one, other members of management, we were gung-ho about something and we were taking a different approach. And this independent director said, no, this is what I think we should do, and so on and so on and so on and so on. It went back and forth for a while. And the merit and the value in that exchange enriched the outcome of the situation. So, and that is the role of the corporate secretary, because engaging with those independent directors, they know that they can engage with me and trust that their message, because the CEO or the chairman cannot and will not be there all the time. So the role of the corporate secretary is to be that intermediary where you translate and honestly translate what the input of the independent directors are to the family. Okay? And I have found that has been a very rich exchange, and being that broker in between, I think it's actually fascinating, because I have seen outcomes be fantastically enriched as a result of that, of independent input and creating a culture of openness and transparency. Flexibility is another thing. One size does not fit all. And I think that is something that a corporate secretary in a family owned or operated or whatever you want to call it business has to always be conscious of. You can't just take governance rules or guidelines and expect that they will be applied or should be applied even in the same way across the board in a family-run business, because you do have a different factor. And the fact that you have that factor, you would be remiss in your duty as the corporate secretary in not making recommendations about governance, excuse me, about governance in a way that fits into that fabric and does not destroy the essence of that family-controlled culture or operated culture. So one size fits all, and sometimes the one size does not fit all. And what I would recommend in some of those things is that you look at what the end game is. What is the objective? What are you trying to achieve? And work back from that in tandem with the governance rules, and then come up with a solution or a structure that matches the culture and meets the requirements or the guidelines within reason. Okay. Third thing I want to talk about is, as corporate secretary, you must not be a politician. You must be a diplomat. And when I say you must not be a politician, don't play games, because there is always in a family owned and family run business, there's what I call a household element. You will never know, as trusted as you are, I mean, and as with any family, you will never know the full story and the full dynamics. So don't play favorites. Don't get caught in between. You know, when you change presidents of the United States, or the king or queen dies or whatever it is, or even in ministries, the permanent secretary is called the permanent secretary for a reason, because you have to work with whoever is there. So don't have favorites and don't get into politics, okay? And then in the families, you have different generations. So don't ignore any generation, because each level of that family structure has a sense of ownership. Now, the level at which they have ownership at a particular time varies, but you never know who's going to actually be in that chair at any given point in time. So you know, you have to watch the generational interaction there. and constantly be a bridge as required. When you do that, you gain the trust of the family because they know that you as the corporate secretary will be fair regardless of who is there. They know that they can trust you and to be not taking sides and to be fully transparent with everyone.
So I'm going to ask Aleema and Kenny to reply because I really found what you said and I wrote it down, these 3 points about flexibility, being a broker. You know, I had questions before and I wrote down broker, bridge, and you know, that was so exciting for me. So I really want to move on to Kenny because I am not a panelist. So I have to stand back and stand clear.
Okay.
So Kenny, let me hear.
Yes, okay. Very interesting presentation, Francis. A couple of things jump out at me. While not the corporate secretary, but on the board of other companies, bigger family companies, I again focus on governance, corporate governance practices, and to avoid groupthink. The idea of the broker is very important, and being able to sort of influence the independence on the board to make sure they participate before decision is made. And very skillfully, the corporate secretary role has a very big role in that, so that at the end of the day, the board gets the benefit of the issue properly being discussed to come up with a decision, even though it may be the same decision at the end of the day, but you would have had the benefit of the participation and the views of all the independents, because that's what you need them there for. And I could understand your 10-15 minutes plan presentation to the board that got railroaded. I've been through quite a few of those, and but it helps before you even do the presentation, you know, to have a discussion with the individuals, just to get a feel from them in what their take is, so you could prepare yourself for that. Yeah, so very interesting, very interesting.
I would add, you know, Francis, I don't know, the example that you gave in terms of iterations of documents that you thought would have been quickly settled at a meeting, I would have experienced that just last year in relation to one of our key governance policies. When you take it to the board, and again, where you have independent directors that might have a different train of thought, they throw these things at you, and it causes you to think outside the box a bit in terms of, you know, what we thought we had covered. And sometimes in a family-owned business or a family-controlled business where you have members of the family being part of management, the ability of these independent directors to be strong-minded and strong-willed in terms of making their voices heard, I think that's an important element as well. We don't want to have, you know, the yes men or the yes women on your board. Especially if you have a family-controlled business, you want that expertise flowing in to help you to make better decisions, because I think family-controlled businesses have to accept that they will be limited in resources or even the intellectual capital that can come from the family members. And part of the role of the corporate secretary is certainly, as you said, to broker and to facilitate that sort of discussion between members to reinforce, you know, the freedom to express what their views are. And certainly, in my experience, having as well a strong chairman in the area of governance certainly helps to make that easier and to make the life of the corporate secretary easier and vice versa.
Thank you very much, Aleema. And you are the last person, but certainly not the least. So I want you now to bring your presentation so that we can get the overall holistic view of role of the corporate secretary.
Thank you very much, Margaret Ann. Like Francis, I think I tried to break down my thoughts into sort of 3 buckets or 3 areas. And I was, especially moved by Professor King yesterday, because I was a bit concerned about how my viewpoints and presentations would tie in to CCGI's Governance Week. And I wanted to see how best I could bring my message in relation to the theme of resetting values to create value. And therefore, it was a bit of a challenge to just select some key areas to share this afternoon. But hopefully I can bring some sort of context in terms of family businesses and the role of corporate secretary. So I think we've said quite a lot already. Our earlier panelists and Camille Facey as well would have spoken a lot to the role of the corporate secretary. And Kenny has provided us with some insight in terms of startups, family businesses that start as mom and pop, etc. In my experience, as I would have said, I think I'm somewhere in between the other 2 panelists. Bourse has been around for about 25 years. We operate in a financial services sector. Therefore, even though it's a family-controlled business, it's very highly regulated. And therefore, a lot of the governance best practice areas must be covered. So similar to what also Kenny said, when the mom and pop go to submit an RFP and it asks them for these 5 things or 10 things that they might not have had, they've had to, in order to expand the business, they've had no choice but to incorporate some of these governance areas into their business. And I think it was Francis who spoke about best practice, but relevance in terms of size and scope for implementation in a family business. And I think that is very important. So the critical aspect where, especially in my experience, you need to hit all the markers, but you don't want to, as some people say, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to make sure that the risk or the issues that you are trying to mitigate are properly addressed in response to your business, the size and the issues that exist. And I think one of the key things in family businesses tend to be conflicts of interest, which can be very hard to maneuver and manage as you grow. I think when you get to the stage of Francis, 140 years, it tends to get easier, right? But the role of the corporate secretary, as I have seen, you really have to be that governance officer. You have to have certain qualities that make you that sort of pioneer in terms of pushing the agenda for governance. And it certainly helps having the independent directors, etc. But when you still have a founder in a business, it certainly takes a lot in terms of managing relationships to get buy-in. Let's put it that way. And my second area that I really wanted to talk about is the potential challenges for corporate secretaries in those SMEs and family businesses. And when I say the challenge, Kenny would have alluded to it, generational changes when you have moving from a founder to 2nd generation or 3rd generation. Sometimes you have resistance to change, and a good corporate secretary has to be able to broker, yes, to have the high level of emotional intelligence. Yes, certainly, don't play favorites. You have to be able to manage those relationships in a way to gain the trust that you are working for what's in the best interest of the company, and certainly by extension, the stakeholders, which includes the family. And one of the things that Professor King spoke about yesterday would have been the movement away from the purpose of a business to create wealth for shareholders, to really be more inclusive of all stakeholders. And in my view, certainly this is something that corporate secretaries have to try to find a way to fit into their interactions with board members. So a lot of the things that our panel members would have discussed earlier, things like training, and I have experienced it. A lot of my board members are senior, they are seasoned directors. So it is sometimes challenging to bring these new concepts or areas of governance to the board. And I think a good corporate secretary needs to know what are the right amounts in terms of dosages and the timing in terms of when it is relevant and how it can be received. So that's why I particularly also liked the mention of the information sharing for directors, which didn't seem like training, but it was sharing material. And I think when you have directors on a family controlled business board who understand and realize the importance of, even if they all don't, but at least some of them do, because some of them do, it encourages the others to make sure that they are not falling behind. And I think also the corporate secretary has to know how to leverage that in order to get their message across to those other directors, right? In terms of the skill profile of a corporate secretary, again, highly organized, proactive. We spoke about a lot of these things already. Their knowledge of the laws and the regulations. And I think, as it was mentioned just a short while ago, I have been to the Ministry of Legal Affairs to file annual returns, etc., prior to COVID. And many people, I would say, especially after the last amendment to the Companies Act, a lot of people coming in there, mom and pop businesses, they don't know what is return of beneficial interest. They don't understand what it means to be a beneficial owner. So part and parcel of all of these things, the corporate secretary has to be now, certainly has changed from what it was before. They have to be current with all of these things that are happening, and they need to flow it through to the board so that the board is aware. And the family members that either sit on the board or are part of the management, they can build that trust and reliance on you and that dependability on you so that you can carry the agenda of governance to benefit, the entire company, and it will resound to the benefit of the shareholders as one of the stakeholders in the company. And I think lastly, I know Francis spoke quite a bit about it, the value of independent directors. And I will say that certainly having a chairman that understands that governance, especially in a family-controlled business, helps to sort of assuage some of the issues with family members. Because, as I said, sometimes there's resistance to change. Family has been doing business for a long time in this particular way, and then you have someone coming to tell them, well, no, this should be done differently. And always the messaging, how it is packaged, the corporate secretary has to be very skilled and versed in delivering that package in a way that is appetizing to those other influencers, because there are influencers on your board other than the corporate secretary. So I think those are some of the key things in a family controlled business that might not necessarily be at the startup level, but certainly doesn't have all of the complex governance structures. It is essential, nonetheless. A lot of the things we spoke about in terms of onboarding of directors, structures for the competencies and so on, all of those things, in my view, it shouldn't matter whether you're a regulated company or not. You can operate in manufacturing, you can operate in energy, you can operate in those areas and still have some of those things in place that would help to build confidence, by your other stakeholders in the type of business that you run. And I think we're also seeing now more corporate social responsibility as family-controlled businesses are starting to understand, whether it's generational changes or whatever it is. I think we can all agree that we're seeing that expansion now as the private sector starts to understand its role in terms of giving back to the economic and social issues that we might be facing in our various environments. Thank you. I think that's my 10 minutes or more.
Aleema, I want to thank you very much for not only bringing us up there, but you also reinforced some of the information that was happening throughout the series at Kamla, and they had a lot of series on corporate governance. And you were able to pull from every area, including what we had in the opening yesterday, and bring it to and make it practical for us to see it actually happening in the workplace. So I want to invite Frances now to make her comment.
Thank you very much, Margaret Ann. I thoroughly enjoyed that that presentation. I want to start with your last point there, Aleema. Messaging and how the corporate secretary packages the message is extremely important. I'm going to share, because I do believe people learn from when people tell them about their mistakes and so on. So earlier on in my career, I might not have been with regard to a particular situation as diplomatic as perhaps I should have been. I tend to be a very direct person. People know exactly where I'm coming from. I don't, you know, and so I was not very diplomatic in dealing with this, but I mean, in hindsight, of course, experience is 2020, right? And did I ruffle feathers? Plenty. Was I fired? No. Why? Because that level, one, it is that level of challenge is encouraged. Two, I had built a certain level of foundation of trust. And that is why it is very important for the corporate secretary to be able to be in a position where you are trusted by the family, okay? And no, I wasn't fired. And in fact, I've been promoted 2-3 times since that incident. In fact, that brings me to the other point. So, you know, earlier in the presentation this morning, Camille spoke about how she's been known to kick her chairman, right? Well, I have never kicked my chairman under the table. All right. But I remember when I got my last promotion, you know, the chairman was announcing it to the board and, you know, congratulating. And he was saying, you know, over, you know, I can't believe 15 years have passed since Frances, blah, blah, blah. And I want to congratulate her, well-deserved, all of that fluff and so on. Very nice, very touching. And then he said, but I have one complaint. So I said, well, what is that, chairman? Everybody's there, you know, silent. And he says, Frances manages me too much. And then he starts to laugh in this way. In other words, that's the expectation. I mean, every corporate secretary has their style. Camille kicks her chairman, or chairperson. I don't kick, but I do, you know, as a corporate secretary, you have to be able to sort of manage and support. I prefer the word support strongly your chairman in his function at key times and opportunities, you know. And your point, Aleema, around having, you know, buy-in, you know, I have, for most of my career here, the founder was present. So you, albeit at different stages of his, you know, involvement in the business, rolling back as time went on, but there was still that point you made about getting buy-in is very important before you decide you're going to drop something on the table. You have to walk it through, you have to massage it, you have to sell it, and you have to have the type of personality that will be persistent if you believe in something. So the other day, there's something that I wanted to do, and I sent an email, I didn't get a response. A couple days passed. I sent a WhatsApp, I didn't get a response. A couple days passed. I said, well, now pick it up the phone to call on this particular point. So I said, hello, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. He says, you're calling to do a sales pitch. I said, yes. He says, you're very persistent. I said, is this new to you? He said, no. He says, okay, go ahead. He asked me a couple questions. He said, go ahead. You have to be persistent if you believe in something. You know what I mean? So I really enjoyed your points because I could relate it thoroughly on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much, Aleema.
I mean, you know, when I listened to the three presenters and they had different spin or different perspectives, but yet they were saying they were alike. So that while Kenny took it from the beginning stage, two small businesses, two or three family members, and that is why he used the term, there's a difference. He said there's a difference between a family business and a business family. Kenny, you're back?
Yes. Sorry, I just lost the internet there for a while, briefly.
Right.
Sorry.
So your turn.
Okay, all right. A couple of things, and thanks, Aleema, for widening the scope of the discussion. Yeah. I would also like to start on your last point, and with some of the startups and even some of the more established family-run businesses, family-owned businesses, a lot of time has to be spent with the founder or the chairperson. First of all, to get them to understand what it is they're trying to achieve. And understand what are some of his or her concerns with the business and trying to grow the business, trying to come up with a strategy. If they don't get on board with that, it becomes very difficult trying to put the practices in place. But once you understand what are those concerns, and you know that you could use best practice to achieve that turnaround, it becomes so much easier because you're going to get the full backing in the board meeting for some of these initiatives. And I've been in some of these family-owned companies where from one end of the spectrum to the next end, where you have very acrimonious relationships going on between the family members, but they don't have terms. So you have to find ways of living and working with them. And on the other hand, where you have very family-oriented, very friendly, very open relationships between the members, that makes it easier to get things put in place. You have a lot of support. So it's really a balancing act as a corporate secretary. The other thing too is, while you might have guidelines with policies and procedures, at the end of the day, is really to make sure we know what the intent is. Once we could get them to understand what the intent is, then you could sort of maneuver the practices and the systems to be able to achieve that at the end of the day. But it's a work in progress. And it takes a lot of time speaking with each one of the family members to understand what their issues are when they come around the table, who is afraid to say what, who has a problem with who saying what, and all those other things. But at the boardroom, you must be able now to sift that out, filter that out, and just keep the issue in front so that they will discuss the issue and vote or make a decision based on the issue. And then you as a corporate secretary now, you're obligated to see that through. So you follow through and make sure that there's some sort of quick wins. So when the next time they come around to make a decision, it starts becoming a sort of a routine where, okay, let us look at it from all different perspectives and gradually move it away from that one person decision to everybody taking part before that final decision is made. Yeah, very good, very nice points and expansion of the discussion.
All right, truly, we appreciate that. You know, this session here, when I started off, I said 3 experienced panelists, but little did I know. I think you all went beyond, you know, and when we invite questions to come in, and I know I had one main question so far, I haven't seen any more questions in the chat. But when I looked at, if I was to start, I started off by saying, Kenny looked at the family from the perspective of having small members involved. And he talked about when you come to the table, in order to have segregation or separation of powers, if you want to call it that, separation of powers and segregation of duties, roles and responsibilities. But in this case, it's separation in terms of family, business, and the board. And one of the things you said is to address them by their title. So it's not a wife here and a husband here and a child here. We all have positions. Let us be professional and address it by, and I found that was really insightful in terms of, and coming to the table with truthfulness and transparency as it relates to the business, and don't bring other things on the table at the same time. And then I was looking at, Francis was talking about be that bridge, be that broker, be that bridge. And it really is, that is so important that corporate secretaries know who they are and whose they are and their role in that position, so that they could always be that pivot and a band, because depending on how you balance, things could go differently to where you want it to go. So I really appreciate, don't be the politician, be flexible, and that's where the flexibility comes in. And Aleema, you reinforced what was said in terms of talking about the skills, come with your skills, have the cutting edge information. You cannot be like everybody else. You need to know what's going on out there. So I wrote down the word pestle, because when you learn, you have to know from all the different angles, what's going on in the environment, what's going on in technology, what's going on in the law, what's going on. So you have to be able to be up to date so that you can give good advice. And that is where they will be able to trust you and work with you and so on. So we have a question, and I said all that to make up time to see if we get more questions. But I'll read out this question, and it says, it came from Renuka Ramdas, and the question was, how would you advise a corporate secretary approach the role where the family-owned business is already well established and the corporate secretary is now joining the company? That's her first question, and I don't know if you want to take it, and then I'll give the second question.
I will leave that I will defer to Francis and Aleema for that one.
Well, maybe I'll start. If it were me and I was joining a family-owned business that, based on the question, says it's already established, to me, it would be sort of similar to your director orientation at that sort of level. You may want to know what sort of procedures and policies exist that help to govern that role of corporate secretary. Again, culture. What is the culture of the organization in terms of the board, in terms of the management? How involved are the family members in the role of executive management? And what I have found is that in family-owned or family-controlled businesses, the board might adapt to some extent based on the executive management, if the executive management if they are part of the founders or the shareholders, in terms of culture, not necessarily not necessarily taking for granted the core principles, but I'm just talking about things like the way that you send board papers, the way that you communicate, the timeline for submission of board packages, etc. To me, all of those things speak to culture. So certainly you would want to assess the culture of the organization so that you will be able to ascertain everything that we just described. How could you best be successful in building that trust and working with the board, working with the board members, etc. Don't know if
and the other part of it, they were asking, how should adapting to the pre-existing practices be balanced with introducing good governance practices? So you came in an organization and they already have their way of doing things. How can you now integrate that with good governance
So again, I think it depends on what they have, what you might be looking to introduce. Again, culture, how flexible is management and the board to change, and that will help you to determine in what doses you can implement certain measures of change. It might be that the chairman or members of the board are more acclimatized to the existing regime and they don't really want change, or depending on the management in conjunction with the board, they might be open to, they might want somebody who's an independent thinker, somebody who wants to make that change. So I think for me as a professional, certainly wherever you go, you want to introduce or make sure that you have as best as possible, adherence to best practice. Again, it is a matter of buy-in, but in order to make that case for buy-in, you certainly have to kind of be aware of the culture of where you're going and what works. Because as Francis said, you might be a straight shooter, and that might not necessarily be acceptable in that environment or that culture.
Thanks. So you really have to be diplomatic. That might be a little challenging for me.
Yes, certainly you have to suss out what works and what is acceptable, and in conversations, and you would have to know what type of conversations you may want to have. Certainly, not everything you're going to glean through an interview process. So it's really when you get down into the policies and the procedures, and you talk to staff members and so on, you get a better appreciation of what makes the organization tick and how to actually get things done.
Okay.
I don't know if Francis wants to add anything to that.
I think you pretty much covered it, Aleema. I think you have to know how you have to assess the situation, assess the culture. Change is always, as a human nature is not to just welcome change. We just don't welcome it, okay? There are a few people who just say off the bat, okay, this is great, change, it's great. I've been doing this way for the last 20 years or whatever it is, and now you're coming to tell me something new, wonderful. No, that's not, that's not how it works most of the time. Most of the time, you have to massage the thing, you have to understand the kind, someone earlier today spoke about the different personalities of a chairperson. So you have to kind of figure out which type of person is your chairperson. Is he one who wants a lot of data and support, nitty-gritty stuff to be able to be comfortable in his mind to make the changes? Or is he someone who is, a little more high level, and, if the thing makes sense to him, he trusts what you will do. So you have to ascertain what your chairperson and or the relevant family members would need, and that will take a bit of time. So what I would advise is that before you decide to change anything, you need to do an assessment, yes, of what is there, but also what is the culture and what is the personality and what would be the most effective way to land something. Because the way you would have done it in a previous organization may not be effective in this organization with these particular people in this particular family. So you kind of have to get your bearings, understand the culture, and then think about the best way to land the changes that you want to make.
Great. We have a question from Joanna, I think it's Barrows. I hope I pronounced it correctly, Joanna Barrows.
She loves her last name, so don't she
loves her last name. I heard
loves her last name. That's what I heard her saying.
Joanna, I hope Barrows is the correct way of pronouncing your name. That's the journalist. How do you deal with the family conflict when it spills over into the boardroom? Inhibitions of board members might be lower because of the family element. So they want to know, how do you deal with the family conflict when it spills over into the boardroom?
Well, I could take this because I have experienced quite a few of this, of these situations. First of all, sometimes before it even gets into the boardroom, it starts from outside the boardroom, in the operation. At one point in time, I had to say, hey, folks, let's go in the boardroom. Let's go in the boardroom and discuss this away from the staff. At times, and this is important with the family-owned companies, where the corporate secretary takes control of the board meetings, help set the agenda with the chairperson, help set the agenda, but also influence how that meeting progresses to make sure it doesn't digress. And a couple of times I had to ask for timeout and say, okay, well, let's bring an end and reconvene the meeting tomorrow or some other time and let them cool out, because definitely they will not come to a decision because they are going after each other. Husband versus the wife, and at one point in time, one walk out of the room and everybody else just stand there, sit there watching to know what's next. So and you have to be very skillful in it to make sure that you don't throw egg in people's face. But at the end of the day, let them, okay, we need a timeout. Let's think about this, and then we could reconvene at another time. And this is what we want to do when we come back to the next meeting. Sometimes it will work in one timeout. Sometimes it just fester as they go along, because when they go home or wherever they go to, it continues, and then it comes back into the boardroom the next day. So it's really important to try to get them to understand, and especially with the chair, if the chair is involved in it, to try and let us identify the issue and deal with the issue. And there's some family quarrels that you have to keep out of. You can't get involved in that. They have to solve that themselves. But let us solve the business issue and not the family issue. So it's a very touchy situation, but it requires skillful diplomacy in trying to get everybody back in the right frame of mind to discuss the business.
Wow, that's interesting. There's another question here from Andrew Govaya. Is there an argument that can be made that for family-owned businesses, corporate secretaries should seek certification or training in other specialized business functions apart from the legal background? And his other part, let me see if I can get it to scroll down. Would you consider or openly encourage individuals with other professional backgrounds to hold the corporate secretary title with support from the legal function of the business? Take those two, because I've seen a few more. So
well, maybe I could try to take this, since my background is not legal. My background is actually accounting, and the advice I would give is a corporate secretary has to know the business. So certainly, it really doesn't matter what your qualification is. Once you understand the business, you can provide that sort of useful bridge between the executive and the board. So I would not be one to say that there is a specific qualification that you must have or should have to be an effective secretary. However, I would say that from my experience of not having a legal background, I have found that knowing the law is certainly what you need in your toolkit of being a corporate secretary. And while the law is not part of my background, I have certainly had to start studying it, because depending on the type of business that you are involved in my case, where it's heavily regulated, you will find that the core of the function is one that requires you to know these certain legal elements in order to guide the board, in order to inform the board. So my short feedback to that question would be, I don't think that it's necessarily a prerequisite or something that you must have. Certainly, background knowledge of your business is key, and certainly more important. It might relate to, I think, the sector in which your business operates. But at the end of the day, you're still going to have to know what's in the Companies Act in order to, to provide some sort of advice to the board. You're still going to have to know what's in your governing documents of your company, your bylaws, etc. So I think the question would be, if you're placing reliance or support from this legal function, just how heavy is that support going to end up being at the end of the day? That's just from my own experience.
Well, before I ask Francis to comment, I just wanted to read the second part because that will tie in when the person asks the question. Based on what the question that I asked before, they also said, how would someone go about holding the discussion to move forward with such a proposal, given the rigidity of family-owned businesses to change?
Well, if I were to just continue, if it is that the family business in question holds the view that you require this legal background, then you would certainly need to, I would think, certainly need to list out the key competencies and the areas that a corporate secretary would need to fulfill. And you would then have to show, without the legal background, how are you going to fill the gaps, or what is the plan to fill the gaps? In terms of family businesses being, where change is challenging, it all depends on if that is the view held by the company, that a corporate secretary must have a legal background. And if that is in fact the case, certainly you would have to put forward a compelling argument, because as I just said, while you might be able to have certain competencies filled, at the end of the day, you will still need to go back to that sort of legal knowledge and legal, background to some extent. So Francis, I don't know what's your take.
Francis, it's yours.
Thank you, Aleema. I think you sort of covered it. What I would say is, and just reinforcing what you said, a legal background is certainly useful. I don't think you could get around. You must have some knowledge of the law, and if you don't, you're not going to function very well. So you don't have to be a lawyer, but you need to be able to understand the law, read it, understand it, know how it applies to the business, etc. But the corporate secretary cannot only be a lawyer. The corporate secretary, and you hit the nail on the head with one of the things, and that is the corporate secretary must be able to understand the business. You must be able to read financials and understand what they mean, the story that it tells. You have to understand those things. You have to be in a position to highlight risks. Like, for example, in my role now, even though it's not in my title, because that's the other thing, corporate secretaries tend to become Jill of all trades. So I'm responsible for our risk framework as well. And in a family business, okay, you're talking about risk, strategic risk, strategic business risk, operational risk. One of the things that you have to be concerned about specific to a family, the risk that you have to be concerned about is reputational risk tied to the standing of the family. And that means all generations of the family, okay? So you can't just be, so, a risk qualification would be useful in understanding how risk plays into the business and how it should be reported and so on. That would also be useful to your success as a corporate secretary. It isn't just about, we've long gone past being people who take minutes, okay? Your role is a lot more than that. It's an all-round corporate governance professional that has to have grounding in the understanding of the business, understanding of the risks. And when I say risk, I mean opportunities as well as threats, because risk is positive as well as a negative, okay? And be able to ensure that that information is filtered up to the board in a comprehensive, simple way for them to understand how things go. So training in that area would be useful as well for a corporate secretary, So yes, that's what I would add to Aleema's comments there.
Okay, thank you. This question is for you, Mr. Attai. I'm saying because he said, can you speak a bit about how to manage the board where those individuals are a part of the executive team?
Okay, Again, once the board is established, what I have done in the past is make sure we identify what reports come to the board and who is responsible for those reports. So you have the directors who will receive the report and the information, but the executive team are the ones through the, if there's a CEO or general manager, it comes through them. Sometimes we will invite the unit manager to come and explain a particular issue or a particular report so that everybody will know what it is. But as far as the information that comes to the board is where the executive team will have to make sure that they are the ones to bring good quality information to the board so that the right decisions could be made. And also letting them know their role is to bring the information to the board. And that is where it stops. The board takes over after that in terms of analyzing that information and making a decision on the particular issue. Yeah. I don't know if the others may have a take on that.
Anybody else want us to comment? And then Kamala will tell me how much time we have.
You do have 5 minutes more. So and let me just think, was there another question as well on the chat?
Is there another question?
No, it was just to say thanks and for clarification. So
right.
If I could just go back to the previous question with respect to the qualifications of the corporate secretary.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I think more and more you'll see people other than attorneys performing that role across the industry. So I think it is important that we have good governance, corporate governance training, and people get qualified in governance training. And of course, law will be a subset of that to understand what the company law that is impacting the company business and so on. As Francis said, risk is very important, and a lot of companies, even small family companies, don't really understand that how important the risk is in terms of their business and their sustainability and even protecting the brand. Yeah. So I see going forward a very influential role with CCGI in this, in trying to develop more people into corporate governance for the SMEs and the companies that are growing from one league to the next.
Yes, I agree with that. Kamala, I'm just going to ask the panelists to give their final, because I'm realizing that we only have 4 minutes. So I will, if you all have something to leave the audience with, I will start with Aleema to give your final words so that people could go home with something in their pocket. We're not hearing you.
No? Yes. Yeah. I think in the context of family-controlled businesses, if I have to leave with anything, it would be that change is never easy. And as the governance in the Caribbean, especially as it evolves, it's going to hit the doorsteps of family-owned and family-controlled businesses at some point, whether it's now, whether it's 3 years, 5 years from now. Because certainly as businesses grow, even to open a bank account, I have clients who ask me, how do I structure a resolution? What is a resolution? How do I, So it's going to come to all of us. And I think having that open mind to embrace the change is certainly something that all family businesses, if they want to be successful, they need to be accepting of that. And while, as Francis says, nobody wants to just say, change, yeah, we on board. Certainly in the area of governance, we have to accept the value creation as we have set out for the theme for this week, that there is great value that can be added to organizations with the introduction of governance. So that would be my takeaway. Change is never easy, but we should be accepting of that change.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going in the order that I started one way, I'm going back the other way. So now, Francis, your turn.
Well, I'm in the middle again, so that's okay. It's not
You are the one in the middle. But don't worry.
What I would say, building on Aleema's point there, as a corporate secretary, you have to keep abreast of the trends that are taking place. And in a mature organization, you must not be complacent about your existing governance structures. You must always be stress testing them against the trends, not necessarily moving because it's the fashion, but moving to see whether it's appropriate to your business and whether it will actually add value to your business. So as the corporate secretary, especially in the post-COVID era, where we are never going to go back to what it was before. I mean, no matter we talk about going back to normal, it will never be the same. Change is here, and it is here in a rapid format. When change is happening in this world now, it's just happening rapidly. And you as the corporate secretary need to be able to provide that support to your board to ensure that they are able to keep abreast and in fact ahead of the curve. That's your role. So things like ESG and gender balance and all these things, you need to be able to keep abreast of those things, be able to be persistent, because sometimes there's vision that you have, because remember, that is your job. You are focused on that. The chairperson and the management and the independent directors, they're focused on other things, running the business, overseeing the business from the management standpoint, if they're executive directors, family directors on the board. But you have to be able to be persuasive and be persuasive quickly in terms of making sure that the relevant changes take place. So that is what I would leave with.
Thank you very much, Francis. And Kenny, I'm not leaving you behind. You are with us.
Okay, well, if we were to go by, governance is widely recognized as a key determinant factor in success or failure of a business, of any business, whether it's a family-run business, a small business, medium-sized business, right? There's no two ways about that. And what will good governance do? It will increase the robustness of the business. It will increase the trust in the business. It will build resilience in the business. It will give you the best chances of sustainability. And of course, in the process, in the long term, value creation. So the catalyst in all this is a good corporate secretary or a corporate governance professional to be able to give the organization, the company, the family, the owners, that opportunity to grow their business in line with what is happening with outside, with the industry, and obviously to be ahead of the competition. So with that, I would say the role of the corporate secretary in family-owned business is becoming more and more essential, especially given what we see happening with the COVID pandemic and what has happened in some of the companies that fell aside.
Thank you very much. Now, if this was a short film, I only had to do one take. Everybody just flow. I mean, we start one way and we came back and we wrap it up with corporate governance. There's no other way there's nothing more for me to say, because not only that we run out of time, but everything finished just right. So Kamala, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Francis. Well, I have to say gracias.
De nada.
Yeah.
Un placer.
Thank you all. Thank you, fellow panelists. Very good conversation.
Yes, you have a wonderful panelist and enlightening and insightful. And we really had a lot of nuggets. Kamala, this might be an opportunity for us to identify some nuggets that came out of this and publish it as nuggets to golden nuggets. Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely, Margaret. Yes, I was listening and thinking, you know, I am so glad that these sessions are so easy to record, because you want to be able to share all this learning. So persons can look out for our recordings. We will have them sent to the registered participants, but we will be pulling clips that we would be sharing on social media and also on our YouTube channel. So lots and lots of what Margaret really calls nuggets. I agree with her. You know, some real nuggets. Aleema, you did us proud. Francis, you have to come back. You know, you guys have been sharing so much that, and what I love, and Kenny, you are a living example of it. We need to share for persons things that they will not read in a textbook. And that is what we've been getting a lot from everyone. So really, it's awesome. So thank you all. Margaret, nobody would believe that you have not been doing this for years. You're
Well,
such a moderator.
they won't believe it's my first time.
She was, and was she? I sure that I wanted her to moderate. I was very sure, because I had heard her, you know, ask questions in some of our sessions, and I knew that she'd be very strong. And Margaret, you were excellent. This was a really wonderful panel discussion. So thank you all so much. I want to encourage our participants to log in with us now in the next room as we move to what would be our final panel for today. And we move into an entirely different sector. The public sector, whether you are part of it or not, is important to all of us. The efficient functioning of those organizations makes a direct difference to the quality of lives of people. And we're putting a lot of weight on our corporate secretaries who are in that sector to really do what they can to help improve governance and the effectiveness of our boards in that sector. So join us for the next panel discussion, when we will have Kendra Thomas, Helen Adagwa, and Sati Jagmohan, all of whom are corporate secretaries, sharing with us their experience in the public sector. And our moderator, of course, will be Cheryl Ann Steele, who is herself a corporate secretary with ACTT. So thank you all so much, and I will see you. Remember, you can join us immediately in the next room and then take your break. All right. Thank you, guys.